want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here tonight to arm yourselves with knowledge about a tool that's being covertly used to usher in what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed New World Order, and that's mind control. I've enjoyed talking with quite a few of you earlier this evening pertaining to how mind control has affected some of you or some of your loved ones. Mind control is very prevalent in this country and around the world. These criminals that are in control of our country operate on the philosophy that secret knowledge equals power. Many government secrets and personal reputations were staked on the belief that I could not be deprogrammed to remember those things that I was supposed to forget. They were wrong. For as intelligent as these perpetrators are, they're limited in their thinking by their own immorality. They don't have wisdom. They don't think deep. And they never considered the strength of the human spirit. They never considered what would happen when a good man like Mark Phillips gained knowledge of their secrets and used them to restore a mind rather than control one. I know that I'm extremely fortunate to have survived my CIA MK-Ultra White House Pentagon level trauma-based mind control victimization. Now that I'm in control of my own mind and ultimately my free will, I'm telling everything that I witnessed and saw and heard and photographically recorded behind the scenes of this New World Order effort. By telling their secrets, their power is eroding. I also speak out to give voice to the many mind control victims and survivors out there who can't think to speak out and tell what they know and what they've endured. I speak out for the sake of my daughter, Kelly, who's now 16 years old and is a political prisoner in the custody of the state of Tennessee, where she's being denied any rehabilitation due to the political affluence of her abusers. She's counting on Mark and I to get this word out on her behalf. For Kelly's sake and for your sake, Mark and I have gone to great lengths to document the facts and the truths that are listed in our book, Transformation of America. Transformation of America is self-published, uncensored, so that you can have the facts that you have a right to know and a need to know. These truths have been covered up and kept from all of us for a long time under a blanket of so-called national security. This is the same blanket of national security that has prevented us from obtaining justice despite the extensive evidences and documentation we have. We have over 27,000 documents and evidences. Government insider testimony, medical records, more than enough evidence for any legal procedure in this country, including congressional. But this blanket of national security has stopped us from obtaining justice. It's time for truth to prevail. It's time that these truths were brought to light for the sake of humanity as we know it. I'd like to begin by defining mind control by my experience. I realized that my experience was extreme, that the extensive, total robotic, absolute mind control I endured is more limited than the kind of mind control that's proliferating in society. Mind control has kind of a sliding scale where you've got the total robotic mind control on one side, and you've got mind control that's proliferating, such as in occultism in this country, Or Global Education 2000, where children are losing their freedom of thought and their ability to critically analyze. There's so many different aspects of society that are affected by mind control in varying degrees. It's imperative that this information get out. And as I explained my victimization, it certainly can be applied to all different facets of mind control and mind manipulation. And as Mark and I have heard so many times from people who have read the book and heard us speak out, that this is a thread that's tying things together. All of a sudden, this whole new world order is making sense. The erosion of constitutional values, the erosion of morality in this country, all of a sudden, it begins to make sense when we learn about mind control. I was born in 1957 in Muskegon, Michigan, to a multi-generational incest-based family. This means my father was sexually abused as a child, my mother was sexually abused as a child, and they were sexually abusing me. My father sexually abused me as far back as I can remember. And I've often heard him state that he began substituting his penis for my mother's nipple while I was still an infant. I tell you this so that you can understand that my sexuality was confused in infancy. It was put into an area of my brain that's much like survival, like eating and drinking would be. I tell you these facts so that you can be better armed and understand what's happening in society. And name names. Mark and I name names in our book, Transformation of America, not so that I can say, well, I was in the White House with so-and-so. I mean, I missed the whole glamour part. But this is so you know who the problem is and where these problems lie. The sexual abuse that I was enduring was so horrific that I developed dissociative identity disorder. This used to be termed multiple personality disorder, and I'm so glad they've changed it to dissociative identity disorder because it really more aptly describes the compartmentalization that occurs when a person endures trauma that is literally too horrible to comprehend. Even though I couldn't understand that what my father was doing was morally wrong, the pain and the suffocation of his abuse was so extensive that I developed dissociative identity disorder. It certainly was incomprehensible. There was no place for it in my mind to deal with such horror. Therefore, I developed a compartment in my brain, a little area behind amnesic barriers that was actually the neuron pathway shutting down in my brain in order to compartmentalize the memory of the abuse so that the rest of my mind could function normally as though nothing had happened. So if I'd see my father at the dinner table, I didn't remember sexual abuse. But as soon as he unzipped his pants, the part of me, that part in my brain that knew how to deal with that horrific abuse, the neuron pathways actually physically opened up so that that part of my mind could deal with my father again and again and again as needed. I certainly had a lot of experiences within that compartment that dealt with my father's abuse. But I didn't have a full range of perceptions. I had a very limited perception, a very limited view. Therefore, I'm so glad it's not termed personality anymore. I developed another compartment in my brain to deal with my mother's abuse. Her abuse was primarily psychological. She suffered from dissociative identity disorder herself, and I don't hold her accountable for her actions the way that I do my father, who is fully aware of what he was doing. My mother, in spite of her inability to control herself, destroyed any remnants of self-esteem that I might have developed. And her abuse was so horrific that I developed another compartment in my brain just to deal with my mother. I developed another compartment to deal with the child pornography that my father was subjecting me to. He was earning his living as a worm digger on a 6th grade education and supplemented the family income with child pornography that was being distributed through the local Michigan mafia pornography ring. At that time, there's a criminal faction of our government that was interested in targeting children such as myself for mind control. Because this compartmentalization of memory was something that they deemed ideal for keeping government secrets. After all, if I couldn't think to remember, how could I tell about it? Additionally, people who suffer from dissociative identity disorder develop a photographic memory behind those amnesic barriers, because the brain has a defense mechanism that when trauma occurs, it photographically records events surrounding trauma. And an example of this would be that many of you who are old enough to remember, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, most people know exactly where they were and what they were doing, because this was an event that traumatized the nation. And this exemplifies how the mind photographically records events surrounding trauma. So behind these amnesic barriers, I had a photographic memory, which the government deemed ideal for programming. That way I could deliver messages to and from government leaders, or in my case, also drug lords, who were involved in funding the black budget and funding the New World Order controls. They're interested in programming me so that I would deliver the messages verbatim. When I delivered messages, I delivered exactly what I was told, using the voice inflections of my abusers, with no conscious comprehension of what I was even saying. It was just a tape recorder just parroting out exactly what I'd been told. Another aspect that the government was interested in is that as a dissociative identity disordered person, I had no concept of time, because I was going from compartment to compartment of my brain with no memory of what had happened before. Therefore, I had no ability to even keep track of time, and a concept of it was just absolutely impossible. And it also makes for, if I didn't know what I was doing earlier, I wouldn't know to be tired while I was overdoing something else. Therefore, a person who suffered from dissociative identity disorder had extensive physical endurance, just superhuman strength and ability to keep going and going and going and going. Dissociative identity disorder persons also develop 44 times visual acuity. Very often that's why you see them wide-eyed with the whites around their eyes, because they're actually taking in more of their surroundings than the average person. 44 times more detail than the average person sees. That certainly makes them perfect marksmen for mercenary operations or for intelligence in different areas that the government was interested in developing mind control. I was a chosen one, or a prime candidate, for mind control because of the sexual abuse that I had endured. My sexuality had been enhanced. Therefore, I was used as a sex slave and also delivered messages to and from these government leaders. At that time, because the government, this criminal faction of our government, was so interested in dissociative identity disordered persons, they knew that any child that was subjected to child pornography had to have endured trauma so horrible that they had to be suffering from that disorder. Therefore, this criminal faction of our government sanctioned this child pornography ring so that they could identify and target children such as myself for the project. At that time, the politician, local Michigan mafia politician, the politician who was protecting this Michigan mafia pornography ring was a guy named Gerald Ford. This is the same Gerald Ford that went on to become the first unelected president of the United States. Gerald Ford, I never perceived his political affluence. I only perceived him as another abuser like my father, because Gerald Ford also sexually abused me as a child and sexually abused me right on through my mind control victimization until Mark rescued my daughter Kelly and I in 1988. Gerald Ford is not a pedophile per se. He's what I refer to as trisexual. He'll try anything. Any age, anybody, anytime, anywhere, just as long as he had control. Because he had a perversion of power. in addition to his interest in mind control. Therefore, it was Gerald Ford who came out to our house and explained to my father how to raise me in the project according to government specifications. My father had been caught sending this child pornography through the U.S. mails, and therefore he was approached and told that if he sold me into that project, that he would gain immunity from prosecution. My father remains free from prosecution to date for so-called reasons of national security. My father thought it was just absolutely wonderful and immediately sold me into the project. He felt like the government condoned child abuse. So did I. I certainly felt like the government did. And my father went on to have 5 more children to raise in the project, so there were 7 of us in all. The rest are still awaiting freedom. Once my father agreed to sell me into the project, I was taken routinely to Mackinac Island, Michigan, which is a political retreat where the Michigan governor's mansion is located. It was a bohemian grove of sorts where politicians met and discussed New World Order controls, where they discussed mind control of the masses, mind control in the school systems, how to use occultism as a trauma base. One of my sexual abusers at that time was the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau is a professed Jesuit. Now, the Jesuits are an intelligence arm of the Catholic Vatican. There's a criminal faction within these Jesuits. I'm certainly not saying all Catholics are bad, nor am I saying all CIA is bad or all politicians. There's good and bad in everything. But nevertheless, Pierre Trudeau represented this criminal faction of the Catholic Church, of the Jesuits, who believed in mind control of the masses because they wanted to be the one world church in the New World Order. The money that was being brought in through the church was funding New World Order controls. And he firmly believed in mind control. Another sexual abuser of mine was then Michigan Senator and later U.S. Congressman Guy Vanderjagt. This is the same Guy Vanderjagt that went on to head the Republican National Committee that put George Bush into the office of president. It was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, when I was 13 years old, that I was dedicated to the senator who had become my owner in this mind control project. That's U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd is a Democrat from West Virginia. And again, as you'll notice as I reveal any names, that this doesn't have anything to do with party lines. Democrats and Republicans both are involved because it's not about party lines. It's about who's for the New World Order and who's not. Nevertheless, Senator Byrd had been in office as I've been alive. He's still in office today. He's been head of our Senate Appropriations Committee, which means he held the purse strings of our country. He decided where money would be spent. And I know from having witnessed and experienced and saw so much behind the scenes that Senator Byrd was appropriating money in directions that would allow for New World Order controls. Not only that, but my father, for having sold me into this project, was granted a lucrative military contract for making camshafts for military automobiles and all. My father became extremely wealthy on his 6th grade education. Senator Byrd, as my owner, would decide where I should go, when, what operations I would be forced to carry out during the Reagan-Bush administration, what places I should be taken specifically for mind control programming. Senator Byrd directed all of my activities. Also around that time, I'd made my first communion in Muskegon's St. Francis de Sales Church. Having made my first communion, I also endured an extra ritual after that was referred to as the rite to remain silent. That's R-I-T-E, as in ritual. This involved Congressman Vanderjagt, and the head of our church at that time, a Father Don. And they subjected me to an occult blood ritual. This was so horrific. It was this reversal of the Catholic Mass. It confused my mind because when a person's operating on a subconscious level because they're so traumatized that consciously there's no place for what they're enduring, the subconscious mind has no ability to discern and to question and to reason the same way that the conscious mind does. And this reversal of the Catholic Mass into occultism just made it all seem to run together in my mind. It was absolutely horrific. This blood ritual was so horrible that my mind readily accepted the mind manipulation that I endured afterwards, a hypnotic language, the neuro-linguistic programming, mind-controlled programming, that actually changed the way that my brain was functioning. So that, you know that part of my brain that I said would open up to deal with my father's abuse again and again? They changed that so that they decided when, where, and how that particular compartment of my brain would be opened and accessed. And they replaced the triggering mechanism with hypnotic codes, keys, and triggers, hand signals. There's also phone tones that can also open those neuron pathways and give access to the compartmentalized memory as well. They replaced that at that time. And this was with this right to remain silent. I also had a silence in my head after that, because up until that time, I heard, it was just my own voice, but I heard my voice arguing back and forth with all these different perceptions and from the different compartments in order that I could formulate some kind of a decision about things. I remember before the right to remain silent that I had some free thoughts of my own, and I had hoped for a place in the world where people didn't abuse each other. I'd hoped to have 10 children that I knew would be at least 10 children in this world that weren't abused. I'd hoped for those things, but with the right to remain silent, I lost my capacity, my ability for free will thinking. I lost my ability to even hope anymore. I lost all free will entirely. This right to remain silent silenced this argument that always went on in my head, and instead all I ever heard from that point on was the voices of my abusers directing me, telling me exactly what it was I was supposed to do. I could only robotically follow those instructions and carry them out. By the time I was ready for high school, Senator Byrd ordered that I be sent to Muskegon Catholic Central High School. At that time, there was an enormous emergence of information. The Catholics had long since learned the effects of trauma on the human mind. They'd learned it and kept records of it for so many years, with such things as the Spanish Inquisition and other aspects where people who didn't follow the belief systems were wiped out. The Crusaders had also recorded a great deal of information pertaining to trauma on the human mind. This information was being merged with the Hitler-Himmler research that the CIA had taken and had been advancing on. The combination of the merging of the information was very powerful. And Muskegon Catholic Central was a place where this information was being brought together. It was at Catholic Central that the very basis, the very groundwork for Global Education 2000 was being implemented. This is Goals 2000, outcome-based education. There's many different names for the program that's being implemented in our school systems. It's being forced on our children by the federal government. Global Education 2000 was designed to increase our children's learning capacity while decreasing their ability to critically analyze. That way they would just readily accept whatever they were told without any question and just take all the information in. At Catholic Central, I got straight A's. I did really good in school because I was photographically recording everything in class. I endured occult ritual in the school chapel, as did numerous other students in the school. I certainly wasn't the only one. As a matter of fact, by that time, I really thought the whole world was involved in this kind of abuse. By then, my whole environment was saturated with it. This occultism, this trauma, created the photographic recording of all that I learned in school. Of course, I had no ability to critically analyze it or to creatively use it in any way, but the information was sure in there. It was while I was at Catholic Central that Gerald Ford went into the office of president. I had been conditioned by that time to believe that I had no place to run and no place to hide. This is a phrase that's used to lock in mind control victims of varying levels. That there's no place to run, no place to hide. We're watching you. I certainly felt like I had no place to run and no place to hide. Who would I turn to? I couldn't turn to my parents. I couldn't turn to my church. Couldn't turn to my school. Couldn't turn to the local politicians. And now I couldn't even turn to the President of the United States. I truly felt locked in, which is exactly what they wanted for total control of my mind. Of course, since then, I've learned otherwise. And Mark wisely taught me while I was in the deprogramming process that I did have a place to run. So right at them. And I had no need to hide. Obviously, they do, by the way. They're covering up all their acts with the national security blanket. After I graduated from high school, Senator Byrd ordered that I be transferred to Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee was heavily involved in mind control at that time through the country music industry. And above all, the proliferation of CIA cocaine operations within the country music industry were already in full swing. The political corruption in Tennessee was just all the way to the top. The country music industry provided a cover for mind-controlled slaves like myself to be taken around the country to the various places as designated, and also to distribute and deliver the large quantities of CIA cocaine that was coming into the country. It was my experience that the CIA's so-called war on drugs is no more than the CIA eliminating their competition as they take over the drug industry worldwide. They took their war on drugs to our street corners and turned our streets into a bloodbath. The country music industry provided the cover for distributing the cocaine, so Senator Byrd wanted me to be within the country music industry. Besides that, he fancied himself an entertainer of sorts, and he fiddled on the Grand Ole Opry from time to time. When I was first sent to Nashville, he was playing on the Opry that night, and he had a musician behind him, a guy named Wayne Cox. Wayne Cox later told me that playing music behind Senator Byrd wasn't the only way that he backed him, but that he backed him politically as well. After the Opry that night, I endured an occult ritual again. Occultism is oftentimes used as a trauma base for mind control. Who can comprehend that kind of a trauma? Blood ritual is absolutely horrible, and it's a perfect trauma base for mind control, for the compartmentalization of memory. I witnessed Wayne Cox murder a railroad bum down at Nashville's Union Station. It was abandoned at that time, and there were bums around, and he shot him right between the eyes and cut off both of his hands, which was Cox's MO for murder. After this blood ritual, this horrible trauma, I was programmed that Wayne Cox would be my first handler in MK-Ultra mind control. As my handler, Wayne Cox would follow Senator Byrd's directions and instructions. And above all, he would be subjecting me to more trauma sufficient to satisfy the numerous compartments Senator Byrd wanted developed in my brain for mind control programming so that I could carry out various operations during the Reagan-Bush administration. I endured numerous occult rituals after that. Wayne Cox at that time was working directly under the direction of Louisiana Senator J. Bennett Johnston, and he took me to his hometown in Chatham, Louisiana. J. Bennett Johnston at that time was heavily involved in mind control operations because he was running a band of mercenaries out of Louisiana. At that time, this band of mercenaries were going in and out of South America. There was a lot of arms deals going on. There was, and most importantly, when the airplanes would fly these guys down to South America, they would come back full of cocaine, which was being distributed on our streets. Wayne Cox was triggering these mercenaries into operation by showing them a severed hand from another one of his victims, which re-traumatized them into the occult ritual that they had already endured and accessed a specific compartment of their brain. And he told them that J. Bennett Johnston wanted them to give him a hand and carry out a certain operation. He would then give the instructions and the guys would follow him through. So J. Bennett Johnston was heavily involved. At that time, it was 1978, and it was determined that I had endured sufficient trauma to carry out my first trial run operation. An enormous quantity of cocaine had been flown in on one of these operations, and I was to deliver it into the neighboring state of Arkansas. By that time, Bill Clinton's drug operation was in full swing. He was governor of Arkansas, and I delivered this cocaine to a remote airport in Ouachita Forest, which I've since identified as Mena Airport. I also delivered a little packet of information and a small quantity of cocaine, a personal stash from J. Bennett Johnston, to Bill Clinton. I delivered it to Bill Clinton, and he cut out 2 lines of the coke, and he did inhale. That certainly wasn't the only time I saw Bill Clinton using cocaine. My sexual experience with Bill Clinton was extremely limited, in spite of the fact that I was a sex slave. It was my experience that Bill Clinton is bisexual, leaning far more towards a homosexual end. All I've ever seen him involved in was the homosexual activity, with very limited experience with him myself. Whereas my experience was much more prevalent with Hillary Clinton, because Hillary is also bisexual, leaning more towards a homosexual end, and it was she who accessed my sex programming to fulfill her perversions. Around this same time, J. Bennett Johnston subjected me to some other mind manipulation that involved, instead of an occult theme, an alien theme. Now these guys who are manipulating my mind and programming me for mind control purposes claimed, and these criminals in control of our country as well, claimed to be gods, demons, and aliens, in order that I feel totally helpless, in order that I felt like they were beyond my realm to affect. And it certainly worked at that time. J. Bennett Johnston told me that he was an alien. He told me that he had been part of the Philadelphia experiment, and when the ship disappeared, it came back a spaceship. This is in keeping with kind of an air-water mirror theme that NASA uses quite frequently, a reversal, because, again, the subconscious mind doesn't have any reasoning capacity. J. Bennett Johnston then showed me, through his office at General Dynamics, a then top secret stealth. Here was this triangular stealth that wasn't in any of the school books, wasn't being talked about anywhere, wasn't out in the newspapers or anything else. It was being withheld. It was still a top secret weapon system. But I saw this triangular stealth. It looked like a spaceship to me. I'd never seen anything like that. And everything that J. Bennett Johnston was doing and he was involved in certainly was alien to me. So it was easy for me to accept the idea that what was happening was in fact being perpetrated by aliens. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as aliens. That would be foolish for me to even say anything like that at all. But what I am saying is that it was my experience that these were people claiming to be aliens. If there's a reality out there pertaining to any alien influence, we need to sort out the government misinformation and disinformation and mind manipulation techniques that they're using. I know for a fact that the plan is to make all of us feel totally helpless, that what's happening is beyond our realm to affect because we've been taken over by aliens, that our independence day is dawning. So beware of that. Understand that those criminals have been keeping information and technology from us under their blanket of national security. They are 25 years ahead of us at least, technologically. Can you imagine what they've got now? 25 years ahead? What's happened that you're aware of in the last 25 years? Microwave ovens, we've got computerization, and they've had access to all of that to continue their own advancements. They're way ahead. So when they say, it's aliens, and they show us some incredible technology, don't fall into the trap of feeling totally helpless, that this is beyond our realm to affect. Superstition begins where knowledge leaves off. And they have been keeping knowledge from us for a long time. People have all kinds of belief systems. And I'm sure each and every one of you has various and different belief systems as well. Regardless of what your belief system is, it is imperative that you know that these criminals are people. They are within our realm to affect. They need to be held accountable for their actions and their crimes against humanity. It was 1980 and my daughter Kelly was born. She was born directly into the MK-Ultra Mind Control Project on a much higher level, a more sophisticated technological level than I was subjected to. In addition to trauma, she was subjected to harmonic mind control programming on NASA installations literally since birth, before her brain even had a chance to form. As soon as Kelly was born, Senator Byrd figured I'd been traumatized enough by that time and ordered that we be transferred back to Nashville, Tennessee to carry out operations during the Reagan administration. By being within the country music industry, we had a second handler. His name was Alex Houston. Alex Houston is a ventriloquist, stage hypnotist in the country music industry. Above all, he carries out criminal covert CIA operations that fund the black budget. And this certainly included bringing in large quantities of cocaine and distributing them through the United States, Canada. He was working at that time and provided a cover for me to be taken throughout the United States, Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean for these criminal covert operations. As my handler, he took me to various military and NASA installations for mind control programming for specific operations that I was forced to participate in. These operations that I won't have time to get into tonight are detailed in our book, Transformation of America. And they involve such leaders as the President of Mexico at that time, De La Madrid, and Vice President Salinas. It was my experience that in 1984, there's a CIA trauma base, near-death trauma center that's located in Lampe, Missouri. It's called the Swiss Villa Amphitheater. And they'd bring certain involved country music acts in to bring large quantities of cocaine or bring the cocaine out for distribution. Because Lampe, Missouri is just across the Arkansas line and is very much a part of Bill Clinton's cocaine operation. And it was in full swing at that time. It's also interesting to note that this Lampe, Missouri operation is where the country music industry was more conveniently relocated, right there in Branson, so that it would be closer to Clinton's cocaine operations. Lampe, Missouri was a place where I heard George Bush and Bill Clinton talking. From the point of view I had, they certainly were friends, and they didn't recognize any party lines between them. That's something for a smoke and mirrors illusion for the public. It's not something they adhere to because they had exactly the same agenda, and that was for bringing in this New World Order. I heard George Bush talking at that time. He was talking to Bill Clinton, and I've since photographically recorded it and wrote it verbatim in our book. That when the American people became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, was going to be put into the office of president. This was decided in 1984. Actually, I'd heard about it even prior to that. But as of 1984, they were already discussing it as an absolute fact. It was also discussed in the groundwork for NAFTA that by the time George Bush went into the office of president, that Salinas was going to become president of Mexico, and they together would be bringing in the NAFTA, which was the beginning of New World Order controls. I was forced to participate in the criminal groundwork for NAFTA, the opening of the Juarez-Mexican border to the free trade of drugs, free trade of our nation's children. It's absolutely appalling, the criminal roots of NAFTA. Again, this is detailed in the book. But it's interesting to note that these political moves had already been decided way back when. And as I deprogrammed, and as I was, it was really something to me to find out people didn't know about this stuff. I mean, it was so obvious to me. I didn't realize that people were unaware and had bought into some kind of smoke and mirrors illusions of what was going on and never thought to look behind the scenes to what was really going on. But I understand good people don't think that way. They don't have criminal minds. They don't think to look for that kind of criminal activity. Just like these guys are limited in their thinking by immorality, good people are kind of blinded from that kind of criminal activity until their eyes are open to truth. But this criminal activity that was going on at that time, the people that were involved were following directions from George Bush. I don't purport to know it all. I don't purport to know that George Bush is at the very top of all this, but he is as high up as I knew. It was my experience that Ronald Reagan answered to George Bush. Not robotically, not under mind control, but willingly, because George Bush was respected for what he knew about bringing in the New World Order. Consider his past. George Bush first began with the United Nations. Then he went on to head our CIA. Then he ran our country through 3 administrations that I'm aware of: the Reagan administration, his administration, and the Clinton administration, because Reagan and Clinton both answered to him. Mexican President de la Madrid answered to him and knew that Salinas was to be coming into power, and Salinas had more influence in Mexico at that time than de la Madrid, that, as far as my experience was concerned. Also, Saudi Arabian King Fahd followed orders from George Bush, as did the Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney. In 1983, I heard Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney discussing the New World Order. Senator Byrd had acted in the capacity of a pimp and prostituted me to Reagan, and I was present at this White House cocktail party. Now, Ronald Reagan certainly provided a wonderful smoke and mirrors illusion for all of us. For For those of you who don't want to believe that he's involved in this, he told you he's an actor. And he did a real good job of it for a long time. That was his role. That's what he was supposed to do. Nevertheless, I heard Ronald Reagan telling Brian Mulroney that he believed the only way to world peace was through mind control of the masses. I know from experience there's no peace of mind under mind control. And I wonder at a world peace where people don't have peace of mind. Mind control, the ramifications of mind control are far-reaching, because I also know that under mind control there's no free thought. Without free thought, there's no free will. Without God-given free will, there's no soul expression. What kind of a world peace can we have without any free will or any soul expression, without any spirituality? Mind control needs to be exposed in order that people maintain their freedom of thought, in order that people maintain their free will and have that spiritual expression, because of spirituality, when people have soul and spirituality, they're going to be acting in a capacity of love anyway. That is where world peace is, not in mind control. By 1988, I'd been forced to participate in numerous operations against my will, all of which I certainly would never have done. I guess if I had had any part of me that was willing to do anything like that, mind control would not have been necessary. I'm appalled at what I was forced to participate in, but I am relieved that this information's getting out, that people are passing the book Transformation of America hand in hand, hand to hand, so that hand in hand we can take back our country. This information is information that you have a right to know and a need to know, and their controlled medias are not going to suppress truth. Truth prevails. In 1988, Mark rescued my daughter Kelly and I. We couldn't think to escape. I couldn't think to save my daughter any more than I could think to save myself. And all those childhood hopes and dreams were certainly hadn't come to fruition. When Mark rescued Kelly and I, we didn't have any ability to even hope for good people. We didn't know they even existed. We didn't have a capacity to trust anyone. It wasn't within our realm of experience. I couldn't think to reason that Mark was a good guy. But I'd seen him with his animals. And even though I didn't have any ability to consciously reason, and Kelly didn't have any ability to consciously reason things out or to think things out, we had this extra sense developed. We sensed things very strongly. After all, when you consider that we use, 10% of our brain, we'd been like blasted into other parts of our brain, and these parts of our brain were real perceptive on what's considered, I suppose, psychic levels by some definition. When we had a sense for things, kind of like the animals did. And we noticed that the animals loved Mark. He had these raccoons that he'd rescued. He had 3 raccoons, and they all loved him, and they hugged him, and they wrapped their arms around his neck, and they patted on his face and kissed him. And, that was really a neat thing for us to see, because we had only seen our animals abused. We lived on a farm. We had lived on a farm, and we had dogs and cats and horses and cows and guineas and chickens and all kinds of animals, all of which Alex Houston tortured or killed to keep us in line to, if we didn't do this, this would happen to our pet. And we loved our animals. Please bear this in mind, that people who abuse children oftentimes abuse animals. If you see someone abusing an animal, keep your eyes open, look further, make sure those kids are safe. I've never seen an exception to this rule. Not that there's not one out there somewhere, but I've never seen an exception to it. So it was very telling to us that these animals loved Mark. Additionally, when he came in and rescued us, I mean, here we were under the gun of the CIA. Everything was very precarious, to say the least. I was 30 years old. I was supposed to be killed, as most mind-controlled slaves are at the age of 30. Besides, I was considered too old for sex by that time, so I was supposed to be wiped out. But Mark came in and rescued me from certain death and rescued my daughter from a fate much worse than death, and took the time to rescue our animals. He packed up all those cows and horses and guineas and chickens and loaded them up on these different trailers and everything and brought them to safety as well. This had a profound impact on Kelly and I. We certainly developed an ability to trust right there and then. Mark took us to the safety and serenity of Alaska. Since we were safe for the first time in our lives, experiencing love for the first time in our lives, memories of our past began flashing on our mind's screen. As these memories flashed, and I started to remember what had happened to me and to my daughter, particularly during the Reagan-Bush administration, I became enraged. I was enraged at what my daughter had been through, the tortures I'd endured, and what the plan was for humanity as a whole. I'd have been blinded by that rage, immobilized by that rage, if it weren't for Mark's wisdom in telling me that the best revenge is total recovery. Because through total recovery, by photographically recording all those events, I could expose these people for exactly what they are, for what their plans are, for what I witnessed behind the New World Order. Be able to get help for my daughter, who was in desperate need of help at that particular time. So I began writing out my memories. By writing out my memories, I used a different part of my brain than verbalizing. It bypasses emotion. Bypassing emotion was very necessary for logically making the incomprehensible comprehensible, for understanding and grasping what had happened to us and what could be done with that information. Kelly was not so fortunate. Because of the harmonic programming that she'd endured, remembering the traumas and deprogramming the program did not allow her access to all parts of her brain as it did me. She still needed some technological equipment to help her recover. She needed to actually have those neuron pathways vibrated back open with harmonic equipment. Therefore, she went into Humana Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska, in an intensive care unit. She suffered horribly at that time and responded only to some psychological intervention and not to any conventional medications. Kelly was actually suffering respiratory failure because mind control has advanced to the point where they know the ins and outs of the brain and the mind so well that they know how to program not only the subconscious, but to go into the primitive mind, the very area of our mind where blinking, breathing, and circulatory, heartbeat, all that is regulated. And they could go in there and put death programs in place. In my daughter's case, it was respiratory failure, so that in the event that she ever had cause to remember, which they never expected could happen, but in espionage, that can happen. We've heard of that, where the brainwashed and where they have the memory accessed. So they wouldn't have to take the old cyanide pill anymore like they used to, like spies used to. Instead, they would just simply go into respiratory failure, circulatory failure, and no information would be released at all. There was no chance of the information getting out that way. Since my daughter was being raised was genetically and mind controlled, being brought up to be in espionage, she had that program in place and it went into effect. Because of the medical attention that she needed, she was she became quickly thrust into the illegal and immoral custody of the state of Tennessee, where she remains today. The violations of laws and rights that proliferated in her so-called legal case were extensive. We had one clean district attorney that went in and told the judge that he was violating constitutional rights and human rights in my daughter's case, and cited law after law after law, and the judge interrupted him and said, but laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security. This certainly raises a question. What does national security have to do with a documented, validated, and proven rape and molestation of a child's mind and body? For Kelly's sake, and the sake of so many other mind control survivors out there, we need to lift this veil of national security. We need to repeal the 1947 National Security Act. This is a national security that's threatening the security of our nation when it covers up such crimes against humanity as mind control, when it covers up the CIA's so-called war on drugs, when it covers up the selling out of our country to New World Order controls. That's a national security that has nothing to do with the security of our nation. This national security has kept information pertaining to mind control for all of you for far too long. We've got to get this information out. We've got to arm others with knowledge on mind control, because knowledge is our only defense against mind control. We need to get this information out in detail so that we can all be more effective in our particular areas of taking back our country and ultimately taking back our world, for Kelly's sake, for the sake of all the other mind control survivors and victims that I know are out there. There's many, many of them. And for the sake of humanity as we know it. It is truth that sets us free. Please help us spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I'm very privileged to get to introduce you to someone who, through her own efforts, has healed more people than a faith healer. She has done more for humanity than anybody I ever knew, with few exceptions. There are a few good ones out there that I've known and had the privilege to know. And believe it or not, one of them's a psychiatrist. Cathy O'Brien has grabbed the hearts of many people by speaking to them on a level of pure logic. And I know that you folks will gain much from her testimony today. She is absolutely the most pure person I know. Welcome, Cathy.
Thanks. Love is the greatest healer. Oh, I'm so happy to be here today. I'm here with a happy mind. Not the kind of happy that's just a giddy emotion or anything like that, but a happy mind. The kind of mind that is free from fear, bitterness, negativity, all those horrible things that we see on the news and all like that is not healthy for us. I'm here with a happy mind. The kind of happiness that allows for life to unfold the way that it should, where synchronicity and coincidences line up and confirm that you're on the right path and doing the right thing. That kind of happiness that allows for free thought, expanded thinking, and knowing more of what's going on in this world than just what we're told. Negativity and fear immobilizes. That's why we're being bombarded with it constantly on television. The violence, the constant violent images, the negativity, the fear, those are the things that make it difficult to be able to stand up and make a positive difference in the world. It's the kind of thing that just dashes hope. It takes away that ability to have the spiritual strength to stand up and enjoy your life and live the meaningful life that we're all meant to live. I feel so fortunate to have survived my ordeal, to know this truth. Because this is the kind of truth that I want to share with everybody, because we all deserve it. We all should know that there's so much more available to our lives than what we're seeing through politics and war, environmental disasters, the horrors that are on TV. Social engineering through the media is a deliberate effort to suppress the spirit of the people. It's a deliberate effort to control the people. There's a criminal faction in control of our government, and they know that people are easily led by fear. They know what happens to the brain. Whether we just make that choice or don't make that choice, our brains respond to trauma the same way, and they know that. That information on how our brains respond to trauma has been repressed from the mental health community and from all of us. It's our brain. We have a right to know this important information. We need to know that when trauma occurs in our society, that we're all highly suggestible and easily led. Mind control is an important truth that is like the piece of the puzzle that once you understand mind control, that piece of the puzzle brings the whole picture into focus, and we start understanding what is going on in our world. And with that understanding, once we know that truth, once we have that awareness, that's the first step towards positive change. These criminals that are in control of our government, and control of our media, and control of our knowledge base and information have been in power for a long time. They've been using this technique on us for decades. It seems like things are worse right now because we see so much violence on TV, we see so much horror. When in fact, that is awareness starting. The truth is coming out. It's starting to rise. And with that awareness comes the first step towards positive, necessary change that we all need to reclaim control over our own lives and to be able to gather our strength of spirit and start living that life with a happy mind again, where everything happens at such a profound level and is so meaningful. We all will get to live that again as we fully understand exactly what is happening to our society. Mind control is a sliding scale, and it affects people on a very robotic level, such as military special forces, such as the kind of mind control that I experienced during the Reagan-Bush administration, when I was totally robotic, carrying out the will of others, and doing only what I was told to do. My experience was extreme, but it's given me insight into the deliberate machine that's being used to manipulate the minds of the masses. It gave me inside knowledge from inside the White House Pentagon level that I was subjected to. And it's given me the insight in my own healing path, once I regain control over my own mind, what a joy it is to celebrate free thought every day and to make personal choices. One of my biggest personal choices that I have made is to choose happiness. I choose happiness, not giddiness, not ignoring the realities of what's going on in the world, but that happy mind that allows for clarity of thinking, to be able to see the solutions and to see beyond what we're being told, to be able to see beautiful people like yourselves who can't relate to the kind of violent nonsense that we're seeing every day any more than I can. TV doesn't... TV and the media doesn't represent us any more than the criminals in control of our government do. They don't represent us either. And exposing them for their deliberate plan against us is a first step towards the real change in our government and in our school systems and in our lives. Using the example of my life's experience may help to understand exactly how mind control works. I was horribly abused as a child, and when I was growing up, Project Paperclip had brought in the Nazi and fascist scientists from Germany, along with the mind control information that had been used on the people in Germany during the years of Hitler's reign. That information, we didn't really win the war per se. Instead, we just simply transferred it over here. That information on mind control was well known by the CIA, and there's MK-Ultra mind control that was going on at the time that I was born. So I was born at a time when this was just first being implemented, and it was known from that Himmler research that any child that was being sexually abused like I was, any child that was being used in pornography like I was, would be a prime candidate or a chosen one for MK-Ultra mind control. It wasn't that I knew that what was being done to me was wrong or that I was even being abused. I didn't have the capacity for that kind of understanding. For one, my whole environment was saturated with it. My family was sexually abusing me, Catholic Church was sexually abusing me and subjecting me to horrible occult trauma. It was all around. Even my grandfather's Blue Masonic Lodge had a lot of political people attending it that were also abusing me. So it seemed like the whole world was. Even law enforcement was involved. So where was I going to turn? There wasn't really any place to turn, and I didn't know that it should be any different than what I was experiencing, except for that I hoped so much inside myself that there was some place in the world where people were kind to each other, where they were happy, where they were good to each other. I knew that that had to be, because it was something that I could still feel inside of me at that time. Well, while I was still really little and the abuse was going on, my father's sexual abuse of me, even though I didn't know it as abuse, was creating a response in my brain. That same response we all get to trauma, where the subconscious mind is wide open and easily led. Our subconscious mind doesn't have critical analysis. It doesn't have the ability to question or reason or critically analyze. It doesn't have the capacity to rationalize. It only accepts what's being pumped into it. Our conscious mind is our filter. My conscious mind was, when I was enduring trauma, my conscious mind would take flight. It was as though my spirit were in a safe, loving space while the abuse went on. They can't touch the human spirit. They can't take love. That's where we all win. And they never counted on the strength of the human spirit. They don't know about that part. What they know about is what our brains do. And my conscious mind was taking flight. My subconscious mind was wide open. And it was like shoving all of the information of what was being done to me down in the deep, dark hole in my mind, so that the rest of my mind would function normally as though nothing had even happened. You add occultism to that, the fact that I was being prostituted out to local politicians and police so my father could supplement his income, the trauma of being used in child pornography, which, back then was really a big deal. It wasn't available on the internet or anything like that. It was going through, it's horrific under any circumstances, but the manner of getting the information out there was sending a video tape through the U.S. mails. And at that time, since Project Paperclip was in full swing, and there were those with the CIA that were acutely aware that children like me would be easily led, made it where a local politician at that time confiscated that pornography of me and approached my father and granted him immunity from prosecution if he would sell me into the mind control project. That politician was just a little local politician at the time, and his name was Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford shouldn't even have been a local nobody politician, but nevertheless, people bought into his lies. You look at his name alone. His name is Leslie Lynch King, and he took the name of Ford because people would associate it with Michigan, where I grew up, of Henry Ford, and Ford. And so people recognized the name and they thought that meant something, and he was elected. It was just a little local politics, but nevertheless, he fooled the people. Consider that on a local level, if we monitor our politics and pay attention to the people who are running, we can make a profound difference in our own communities right on that level before it escalates any further. Look around, stay aware, and when you vote, pay attention that that vote is actually being counted. Gerald Ford, of course, rose high up in government to be the unelected President of the United States. And he headed the Warren Commission that covered the Kennedy assassination. The Kennedy assassination was a major turning point when our country was taken over by this criminal faction that I'll continuously refer to, that's in control, because that's not our government. These guys need to get out. They've been in way too long, and they have a very adverse agenda with what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed New World Order. But Gerald Ford at that time was very much active in our community and was connected with other political people who are also active in MK-Ultra mind control. When my father agreed to sell me into the project, that sent me to the governor's mansion in Michigan, and the governor at that time was George Romney. He is the father of Mitt Romney. Let's pay attention here to this little series of people that are just weaving through everything, just like mind control being the common thread that's weaving through society's woes. We have the same handful of criminals that continuously weave through. And this isn't about finger pointing either, because eventually they're all going to die off. Eventually they are going to move on, and we need to know about mind control so that we don't simply replace them with more of the same under the illusion of change. because that's what they know how to do, is just make somebody feel familiar with an illusion of change and continue the same old thing. George Romney was actively involved in mind control, and he took what the Catholics had learned from the Spanish Inquisition and other aspects of trauma that was perpetuated in the church, as well as the occultism, and knew that that was being used to manipulate the minds of the masses that attended those churches. So he was taking that information and combining it with the Hitler-Himmler research and making a very powerful form of mind control that was going to be added to technologically and used in the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church is another cult that is very powerful in controlling the minds of their people through trauma and technology, harmonic vibrational technology. This was all known back then. And George Romney had two very significant agendas. And one was to bring the Mormon Church into popularity, because it was the place where we get most of our FBI and everything, that anybody that they need to robotically follow orders and carry out this criminal government agenda. So they needed to have a mind control base to draw from, and they wanted to have someone lead people into it, and here comes the Osmonds. The Osmonds, like the Jacksons, were in the same sub-project of MK-Ultra that I was, and that was Project Monarch. It's a genetic mind control. And in that genetic mind control, they took a full control of both the Osmonds and the Jacksons, and using the Osmonds to bring people into the Mormon Church, because that really brought the Mormon Church to the forefront of people's minds. His other agenda was to permeate the education system. This was even before Goals 2000, America 2000, Global Education, Common Core, it's called today. It's all the same mind control agenda in the school system, where they truly believed that they could control the future by controlling the knowledge base of the children as they were growing up. If they could change history and rewrite history, they could teach them propaganda instead that would eventually cause them to be more compliant in our society today. So this was back in the early 60s, while all this was just sneaking into our society. We all formulate our thoughts, opinions, and actions based on what we know. And so that was going into the school system. It was going into the media. And it was just getting a big start. If they were going to control us through the media, they needed to control some of the people that were going to be out front with that media, like Michael Jackson. If they could control someone like Michael Jackson, harmonically tune his voice, use harmonics in the music, they could use that kind of music in a way that would begin to counter what was happening in the 60s with all the peace and freedom and expanded thinking movement that was going on at that time. So it was the start of a very strong agenda. At that time that my dad sold me into the project, he was flown to Boston and trained on how to manipulate the minds of a child with literals. And it's not that my dad was really smart or anything. He earned his living as a worm digger. We were very poor when I was real little before he sold me into the project. And he's not the smartest, but he still knew how they taught him how to manipulate a mind. And this was the first basis of what the Boston connection is on the Catholic child abuse scandal with Cardinal Law. And I'll come back around on where Cardinal Law was sent when he was caught in that scandal. But nevertheless, it was part of the training that my father had at the time. So we're beginning to see how this is just a natural flow and going out into our society in so many different ways. When I was at the governor's mansion in Mackinac, I met who would become my owner in the project. There's U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. He's finally gone. He was in office as long as I've been alive. He was head of Senate Appropriations, which means he held the country's purse strings. He delegated money. And one of the very first things that he was doing real hard was to make states reliant on federal funding in the school systems so that they could bring in this education agenda and start to alter history that is being taught in order to condition the kids. It wasn't teaching them about propaganda, it was teaching them propaganda. And Byrd made sure that states became reliant on that. That funding mechanism is still in place today. We all need to pay attention to it. The federal government has no business meddling in the minds of our children. We're all capable of monitoring our schools in which our children learn and our own local level. Be active and be aware, just right where you are. We can't change Washington, D.C. at this point in time. Not like we need to, but we could start making changes in our own lives, opening our eyes, have a happy mind, realize solutions are out there, that people are implementing solutions, and changes are beginning to happen as awareness is rising. I'm really excited to see what people are doing to take back the schools. And even where the federal government has come in with the Common Core agenda, they are beginning to come in from other angles and saying, okay, well, let's put in junior achievement and teach these kids how to think. Let's put in peaceful solution and teach them how to think about peace and kindness and think in ways that TV and video games and society isn't showing them. Just take back that peaceful knowledge base that all of us need to have. But it's happening. People are just taking it upon themselves and they're doing it. It's a beautiful thing that we all can do and we all need to do in order to start the positive, necessary change that our children and future generations are counting on all of us to make. As I lost control over my own mind by being sold into the project and deliberately traumatized, systematically traumatized, and having my subconscious mind manipulated in a way that gave whoever was controlling my mind total control over my life. I no longer had free will. I was living their will. I didn't have soul expression because I didn't have free thought. Without free thought, there's no free will, and without that free will, we don't have the soul expression necessary. So we need to be very careful to maintain our free thought. Cherish that free thought, expand thinking, and continue learning more and more and more, because as we learn more, like this information on mind control, it's the one piece of the puzzle that all of a sudden, whoa, so that's what's happening. Of course people aren't all like we're being told. We're the peaceful people that we know we are. We are the majority. If we weren't that way innately within us, they wouldn't need to be manipulating our subconscious. They wouldn't need to be trying to take control of us by controlling that subconscious and manipulating our free will soul expression. When the trauma occurred over and over, the more and more of my conscious mind took flight until I was totally robotic, operating on a subconscious level. I didn't have conscious awareness anymore. And without having conscious awareness, I had no concept of time. I didn't know how old I was, how much time had passed. Without a concept of time, there's no real concept of distance. So I wouldn't even know, because I didn't know how long it took to get from point A to point B, that there was that distance from point A to point B. Boy, does that ever mess up geography. I'm still relearning geography and how things are actually, set in the world, because it's really difficult. It seemed like everything was just jumbled in whatever was the moment that I was living at that time. Without conscious awareness, there's no ability to think further. There's no ability to future think. There's no awareness of what has happened in the past. All you have is the now and doing exactly what you're told to do. Being conditioned for this, Gerald Ford went on to become the unelected president of the United States, and my victimization in MK-Ultra mind control rose proportionately. Take a look at Gerald Ford's cabinet. He had Donald Rumsfeld as the Secretary of Defense. Of course, Donald Rumsfeld was Secretary of Defense under Bush too, and Rumsfeld is, follow the money and see where else he's getting it, and it's through the pharmaceutical companies, Monsanto, who gave us aspartame, the artificial sweetener that so many people use. It's got so many different names out there, equal and other things. But this particular artificial sweetener is actually a chemical. Why are we letting a chemical company make our food anyway? But what happens with aspartame is it dumbs people down. It takes away critical analysis, and it just dulls the conscious thinking. I was fed copious quantities of aspartame, and when I was going into full absolute robotic mind control, my diet was definitely controlled. I had sleep, food, and water deprivation. I was given all this aspartame all the time. And I really lost an ability for any kind of free thought, conscious thought at all. And the aspartame aspect, for all that I was exposed to, that was one of the hardest things for me, was coming off aspartame, because I'd given so much of it. I was addicted to it, and it was really hard to get off of it. It's like nothing else could quench my thirst like a diet drink, or something like that. It was difficult. But understanding what it was doing to me made it easier to get away from that. So here we have Donald Rumsfeld in Ford's cabinet. George Bush, Sr., head of the CIA. George Bush has been the power behind the scenes throughout my whole life. He's still alive, and I know he is still pulling strings. The president is only a figurehead. He's put out there for all of us to gravitate to. Somebody like Ronald Reagan, who'll tell us all the really wonderful things that we want to hear about downsizing government, while at the same time, the whole economy is just crashing behind him. But he said the right things, and he was a figurehead out there for everybody to see. He was being manipulated too. If he had any ideas of doing something different, when he was shot, when the assassination attempt occurred, it certainly took that steam out of him for being able to implement anything. George Bush Sr. was absolutely in control through the Reagan-Bush administration. Check and see, follow Hinckley into the Mormon church, high up in the Mormon church, his father was. And they are very close friends of George Bush Sr. Is that a coincidence? Come on. There are no coincidences. Coincidences are pretty glaring for all of us to be able to follow some really strong truths. George Bush Jr., I know for a fact,
was under mind control. Absolute, total robotic mind control. Look back on George Bush Jr. and see how he acted. It was pretty dull-witted. And that wasn't an act. That was mind control. And that is what it looks like. And at that time, they just figured it'd be a lot easier to pull somebody's strings than try to manipulate them like they did Reagan. Just pull up strings and, and let it be easier. And the same criminals again, behind the scenes, ushering in what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed the New World Order. The New World Order agenda is one where the people are totally compliant, and it's like a slave society because they can't relate to the human spirit or the power of love. That's where we win and where they just completely lose and keep losing. If they would leave it to us, we would have a natural global unity just by natural attrition because we've got the internet these days, we've got communications, we get to see other countries, we've got more travel. And the differences that we see in other countries are something to learn from and embrace, and it's beautiful. I'm so glad I have had the opportunity to travel and see for myself that is the way that people are all over the world. And if we were left to that kind of unity, we would have a natural one world of just who we are, of just love and peace. We don't need wars to force it on. We don't need trauma to force it on. We don't need sanctions and rules. We don't need all of the nonsense that a handful of criminals think they are so much better than us that they need to manipulate all us little people around. Back to Ford's cabinet. Dick Cheney, his Secretary of State. Dick Cheney, I was subjected to during Ford's administration. I knew him throughout my victimization in my years in the Reagan-Bush administration. He worked in the Pentagon. I worked under him in the Pentagon. He knows that torture is what programs people. It's the trauma. It's the way the brain works. You torture somebody, they will say anything you want them to say. They're not necessarily going to say whatever. You can't torture information out of somebody. You can only torture information in and make people say what you want them to say. Torture just doesn't work that way. There's no justification for it. Dick Cheney is one of the most vile, cruel people I ever encountered. And even at that, I don't live with bitterness or hatred. I'm not speaking out to say, Dick Cheney's evil. I don't need, you all know that anyway. I don't need to be doing that just because I had to work under him. Instead, I'm saying it so that we all know what it looks like, so that we know how mind control works. He knows how mind control works, and he certainly used it on me. In Ford's cabinet was Jack Valenti. Jack Valenti was his press secretary. He also happened to be in the motorcade when Kennedy was assassinated, which is just an interesting little aside. But Jack Valenti was head of the Motion Picture Association. That gave him all the power in Hollywood. He decided what we could see on our TVs. That's a very, very powerful position. And it took the grip on the media to be able to alter our knowledge base through the news, through movies, or whatever else we're being fed through that TV box. We all need to think out of that box because it's not an answer. It could have so much potential if people would use it right. We could show people's differences and celebrate those instead of, try to make it like some big evil something. But anyway, that was a grip on the media that was also in this transitional time when this criminal faction took control of our government. Jack Valenti was a very close friend of Ronald Reagan's. And And I had cause to see him during my the operations I worked on a White House Pentagon level, and my exposure to Reagan and so many others. One person I was exposed to that I do want to mention is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a little bit different than the rest, but in the early years while he was still governor of Arkansas, he was running the cocaine operations that the CIA was so heavily involved in, this funding black budget operations to usher in this new world order. So I'm not saying that Bill Clinton is not just, the same as the rest of them or anything like that. The fact is that Bill Clinton was the only one who smoked marijuana. He smoked herb, and that was considered the most horrible evil by everybody else that was around me, because what happens with that is it opens neuron pathways in the brain. If trauma is occurring and compartmentalization is occurring in the brain, our military is trained that way for compartmentalized memory in the brain on that subconscious level. It's set up that way. And if anybody in our military smoked marijuana, it would open those neuron pathways of the brain, and the programming would just go awry. So I was exposed to a lot of negativity about marijuana because it could have started to break up my programming. Well, Bill Clinton wasn't so opposed to it, nor was he a pedophile. He absolutely, I was present when he and George Bush Sr. were having a discussion. I had cause to have heard that discussion. And Bill Clinton did not believe that was necessary for control. Technology was coming on real strong, and he was not going to sexually abuse his own child because he felt like, that she had genetics. Okay, I mentioned 2 little tiny sparks of difference there. And, oh man, if only he could just get one more piece of the puzzle and expand his thinking and expose some of this criminal nonsense that's been going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. for decades that he knows of and I know of. Be aware that Hillary is very much for mind control. She has one of the strongest agendas for controlling a population of anyone I ever heard, that I was ever exposed to. And it was planned that Bill Clinton was going to be put in the office of president for what he'd done for funding the whole mechanism. George Bush Jr. was going to go in because he was an absolute total puppet, and there was going to be an illusion of change. And Hillary is definitely still being held back for that illusion of change. Because when people become disillusioned with Republicans, they put a Democrat in. When they become disillusioned with Democrats, they put Republicans in. The fact is there's no difference between Democrats, Republicans, black, white, male, female. We got to just pay attention to something a lot deeper on the people that we elect and that we allow in positions of power. Pay attention on a local level, because on a national level we have a very serious problem. When you follow the money of the Diebold electronic voting machines, you're going to go right straight back to Bush Sr. and Dick Cheney once again. If they have an electronic voting machine capability, do you really believe those elections aren't being manipulated? And they're going to just act like, oh, we chose this illusion of change. We chose it. We have not. So what we need to do is gather our strength of spirit and stop following leaders that we didn't elect. Implement that kind of Gandhian total non-compliance. Pay attention to what happens in your own society, in the school systems. What's happening in the churches. Pay attention to all that. Because once your eyes are open to this truth, it will give you an ability to see how easy the solution is in light of truth, love, peace, and strength of spirit. I'm seeing Speaking of trauma, being involved in trauma like Mark and I are, it's amazing that we get to have such a beautiful view of how much people are doing exactly that. There is a peaceful, I'm not even going to use the revolution word, I'm not supposed to as you as government whistleblower anyway. There's a peaceful evolution going on, and it's not being shown on television. Why should they? I mean, it's not going to traumatize anybody. It's peace, it's natural, and it's a flow, and it's just people reclaiming control over their own lives. The same way that I had to. The details of what I was exposed to and the operations I had to carry out are in Transformation of America. Access Denied, our book Access Denied is one I'm so excited about. It tells our journey and has all the healing details and information that Mark taught me in it. As a result, people all over the world are taking that information and they're applying it to themselves. And they're healing from varying levels of trauma, child abuse, cult mind control, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which all of our military has, military special forces, people from all walks of life, all around the world are healing with the methods that Mark taught me. When Mark came along, it was February 8, 1988, and that's when my life began. I existed up until that point. And Mark rescued me me and my daughter, out of our MK-Ultra mind control existence. At that time, I didn't know who I was, how old I was, where I'd been. I couldn't think to know any of that, but I was turning 30. And at 30, we have electrochemical changes in our brain naturally. And at 30, a lot of people start having memories start to surface. So before that could happen, because of the government secrets that I'd been exposed to, I was to be killed before, I might happen to remember. The thing is, they never counted on a good man like Mark Phillips taking his insider knowledge and using it to restore a mind rather than control one. Never thought about that aspect. It didn't occur to them that I could be deprogrammed. They didn't know anybody could be. They didn't, because they don't understand the strength of the human spirit or the power of love. They don't know that aspect. So when Mark first rescued me, I was safe for the first time in my life. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was really big, but I couldn't consciously think, I couldn't rationalize, nor could I even think to trust Mark, to accept what he was telling me, sharing with me that I could use for healing. How could I trust anybody at that point? I mean, he may as well have been an alien or an angel or something, because I didn't know that good people like him existed in this world anymore. It was beyond my realm of experience. So I couldn't think to trust. But because I was operating on a subconscious level, I had heightened intuition and my telepathy developed. Because when a person can't consciously think, the brain hyper develops in other areas. It's like being blasted into other parts of the brain, where I had 44 times visual acuity, for example, where it's like having eyes in the back of the head, because I had whites around my eyes, like so many people do that have been traumatized, because it's like you're trying to see something that might be coming up behind you before it happens. So you get this visual acuity. Hey, we have a capacity in our brains. This is exciting that we actually can do that. We can choose that for ourselves if we knew. Just to know that we can do that is our first step towards embracing it and using that for healing vision problems and other aspects. I also had a heightened telepathy, where it's like a real strong sense of people. It's not like knowing every word that they're thinking or something like that. It's more like knowing an intention, and animals are very telepathic. TV doesn't represent them any more than it does us. You know, I mean, all we see in nature shows is animals eating each other, you know, and what they have, and it's like, you know, all this horror stuff. Besides, that traumatizes us further, too. But in reality, out in nature, which I spend a lot of time in nature, animals intercommunicate. And they don't make all the same sounds as each other or do it the same ways, but they know. They know. And there's like this piece when it comes to one pond, you know. It's like, okay, we can go there, and everybody is thirsty, everybody needs that water, and they share. Mark and I feed the wild animals because we live out in the country, and we put a little dish of food out there, and all the wild animals. The other day we had a fox, a raccoon, and a skunk all eating from the same dish at the same time. With a crow right behind them, you know, it's kind of... That's how they are, you know, they're really telepathic and they intercommunicate. They're really cool. Mark had a bunch of animals when he first rescued me. He had fox and raccoon, and he had dogs, and he had all these animals. And all these animals trusted him completely. And they were just real loving with him. I'd never seen that before. Because people who abuse children abuse animals, and vice versa. It's a disregard for life. It's a whole different level. It's such a strong truth that when Mark and I began speaking out on this, the Humane Society and Human Services got together and they said, okay, when you get an abused animals, let us know, we'll check the children. When we have abused children, check the animals. Because it is that common of a thing. So what I'm seeing with Mark is that animals just totally trust him. And I sensed, if they could trust him, I could too. And that was the first step, just to be able to trust, to know that there's something better, something more out there. He strapped a watch on my wrist because I had no concept of time. And it gave me a concept of time. A concept of time equates to a concept of awareness. It's very powerful for anybody who's been traumatized or been through something to be able to monitor time and stay consciously aware so that they don't dissociate and aren't being misled by someone else. The watch is a very important part. It took some time before I gained conscious awareness, before I gained conscious thought. And I remember the day that it first happened, when I first went into that part of my brain where I could have a conscious thought. That conscious awareness thought was like, it had a feeling of like, whoa, you know, like, whoa, you know, I could feel things. It was so tangible, I could feel again. You know, because I was consciously acknowledging that I was feeling something. That is an amazing thing. When we see people who've been horribly abused and they cut themselves and the horrible things that they do trying to feel, it's because they don't have that conscious awareness of feeling to where they can connect with it to the degree that they need. Strap on a watch and start writing out memory. Writing out memory is the biggest tool that Mark gave me. Starting to write takes the logic part of the brain, and so all this repressed memory of what had happened that was shoved down in these little dark holes in my brain would be shifted over to logic as I wrote it out. And there it is, right in front of me, where I become consciously aware and it spans all of my being. With that conscious awareness, I didn't have to get emotional about it, like, oh, look what happened to me, or anything like that. You know, I already survived it. And besides, Mark gave me another tool that was really, really cool and really important for me. He said, voice no negatives without a solution. Think about that one. Whoa, I couldn't just gripe and complain about what happened? What? I had to think of a solution? Think of a solution, that meant I had to push my brain to think further. I had to be able to expand my thought. And with that came like a need to program myself to start thinking. So I would put little notes up to myself, like on a mirror, on a refrigerator, that said, think further, consider other perceptions, consider other angles, and of course, voice no negatives without a solution. This is very important. That was my very first step towards being able to have a happy mind and to be able to think further and have clarity of thinking. But that took some time. I had to exercise my brain in a lot of ways. But the most important part was writing out memory. Everybody who's been through any kind of trauma should write out memory. Even today, if I get so fed up with the news or something, I just can't stand it anymore, I'll write a poem with a solution and possibility, and to be able to expand the thinking of it. Because just writing is still, shifting what would otherwise be traumatizing into a logic part of the brain where I can actually deal with it. Logic is like conscious, critical analysis where we can think things through and be able to make some sense of what's happening in our world today. So if the world is just looking too dark, if it's getting too depressing, right. Focus on a solution. Get out in society. See what you can do to make a difference. Those are very important keys. Take a walk in nature. When you walk, it uses the right and the left brain to be moving your feet and do the walking. So it's very healing right there. I'd have memory flashes coming in. Oh boy, that childhood abuse that I went through with my father that I didn't know was really abuse because it was my whole world. And besides, it started before I could even, while I was still an infant, so I didn't have any way to judge that, So it allowed for me to be able to know what happened in a way that wasn't filed in my brain under abuse. So when people have gaps in their childhood or in their memory and they don't know what happened, especially if it's early childhood before age 5 while the brain is still forming, it may not be filed under abuse. A person asks themselves, wow, was I abused as a child? It's not likely to get any response from the brain that way. Sexual abuse has pleasure to it too. It could be filed in a really unexpected direction. But writing out memory is the key. Taking a walk starts flashes of memory. When you're safe, when you're at peace inside, when you start making a note of that little flash of memory that's intruding on your present moment. If you find yourself doing something, limiting yourself and your own actions because you're this or you're that, well, who said you're this or you're that? Why are you thinking that way? Write it out. Write it out. Continue. Always write it out. Then ask yourself specific questions, and those questions are in Access Denied, as Mark taught me. You ask yourself how you got there, where you went after, and all of a sudden you're bridging events, and it's taking it out of that little dark compartment of the brain, and it's bringing it out into full. I don't focus on my past. I'm not of that kind of a victim mentality. Instead, I've addressed the issues. I know my own truth. And knowing my own truth, I have inner peace. And with that inner peace, when you know your own truth, that is where the happy mind begins to come in. And you can start thinking and realizing the possibilities and the potentials that are in society. Now that I've written up memory, I've healed, Mark and I released Transformation of America. I didn't want to release it because it was horrible and people have enough horror in their lives, but it was essential because it was our testimony for the U.S. Congressional Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Oversight, and they were censored from the information for reasons of national security. Congressional oversight on intelligence is censored for reasons of national security. People need to know this. Upon the advice of an attorney, we released the book en masse. Now, it's been translated into numerous languages. It's in law libraries worldwide. College students are writing their thesis on the information. They're being taught it in major universities, and especially in the areas of law. It's also being used in mental health, but not as much as access denied. When trance was out, and Mark and I began speaking out, I was motivated by love for humanity and love for my daughter to bring the information to light. As the books went into translation, we would speak in the different countries where it was being translated. We spoke in Germany, which is an amazing experience considering the Hitler connection. Those people are acutely aware that the United States is being manipulated and controlled. They consider we're more controlled than the Nazis were. We're dumbed down further. Not all of us here, but as a nation, because of the technology that's being used, the harmonics, the music, the manipulations through the media, the terror, the trauma that's been going on for so long. They know. They've also reclaimed control over their lives, and they hope this truth will reach everyone and set them free, because knowledge is our only defense against mind control. As U.S. government whistleblowers, bound by the Whistleblowers Protection Act, with national security on us, with all of Mark's brilliant expertise in marketing, we are not allowed to advertise. We're not allowed to solicit. We're counting on people to spread the word, to get the information out there. Person to person, mouth to mouth, is how the information started spreading. Now it's gone global, and now it's being taught in schools. And all of that was done because truth is very powerful. And it was brought to light on wings of love. And love is the most powerful force in the universe. That's a powerful combination that has made a big difference. Mark and I wanted to get information out to people because we hear from people, hundreds of emails from all over the world every day, from people who are wanting to heal from whatever they've experienced in their lives. When we were in Italy with a translation of our book in Italy, it was right at the time that the Catholic child abuse scandal came to light. Cardinal law had just been shifted over to the Basilica in Rome, and it was a very pivotal time in Italy when the Catholic child abuse scandal was brought to light, and they realized that the abuse of the children was being used for mind control manipulation. The head of Italy's psychiatric department went on national TV, this was right while we were there, and held up our book and told people to read it. It was very important. It was true. It was essential for them to know what was happening with the huge transition that was beginning to take place at that time. Even though, like so many priests, that they just get shifted around. It's like creating illusions of change. The figureheads that are out there that I say the presidency is, when the same powers are in control behind the scene. Bear in mind that this new pope, who I'm certainly not judging, if you just have a total passion for going against the child abuse in the church, for all I know, but watch behind him. Watch who's really got the money pulling, doing the manipulation behind the scene. We have to watch more than just the figureheads that they have out front. But Italy was a wonderful experience to see how so many people who had been subjected to Catholic abuse were healing. But they wanted the healing tools. They wanted to know how to write out memory. They wanted to know how to cope with their memory once they did remember it. And so we wrote and released Access Denied. Access Denied, for reasons of national security, was used way high up in the Catholic child abuse scandal lawsuits and everything to help people heal. And it went from that top down and reached a lot of people that way. It's good to see the negative of my experience helping so many others and being used in such a positive way. I encourage each of you to read these books, gain the insight, the hope, the solutions that are offered, even the coping skills, for dealing with the horrors today, and get the information out there. And when your eyes are open and you see someone who's been horribly abused, you'll be able to help them with the information. Hey, it's within you to heal yourself, and here's how. Share the book. Share just the information from the book. Whatever you're inclined to do, go out and do it, because the word is spreading through people like you doing it. You may have seen our dear friend and associate, Shayla, who's at our table helping us out and assisting us in so many ways. She and I are real active in our local community, making a difference where we can. Of course, the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, child abuse, that's a really important thing. And I went and checked where the child advocacy centers were in the mental health areas, and they were implementing our information. They didn't know that it came from us, but it was our information. The judge is so harsh on child abuse because they know what it does to the minds of the children. They're real hard on those criminals. Our sheriff is real hard on those criminals. Pay attention to your sheriff. Your sheriff is our last line of defense against the federal government. If there's going to be a federal raid, it comes to the sheriff. You have the ability to know your sheriff and to make sure the right person is elected for that very important and powerful job. And because of that, my friend Shayla and I, we campaigned for that judge on their elections. We campaigned for the sheriff. And we kind of expanded another direction, because with HAARP and all the environmental changes and the global changes that are happening, I know that our planet has its own changes, but they're accelerated because of HAARP. Check out HAARP. And I wanted to make a difference in the environment, in the best way it seemed was through education. So we went into the school systems and talked with the children about litter, recycle, the environment, caring about the environment, and realizing that they all just simply needed to know, to think, to care again. Because with all the kids are being bombarded with, they're getting real hopeless, and we need to give them hope. We need to show them where they can make a difference, and what a big difference they can make. Picking up one piece of litter could save an animal, and that's just a big step. So we are making differences in those little ways. Look around your community and see what you can do to make a difference. And everybody, gather your strength of spirit with this truth. Truth does make us free. Free to expand your thinking, and free to evolve in light of truth, and evolve with love, and keep that evolution going. Thank you so much.